I felt more rejuvenated and that there was more life in this assembly of people from just different faith journeys and different places in their faith. I was more encouraged in my faith and more enlivened by this assembly of people than I could ever imagine and ever have been in any sort of church small group setting. And my question to you was, why don't we have that?
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Pursuit. Jeff Hutchin here, John Saborov, and this is going to be an interesting day. This is going to be an interesting episode. We're going to go places where no man has ever gone before.
Star Trek
Hey,
episode.
very good. I'm shocked because as a kid, you never got to watch television.
No, that was my dad's favorite show. That was one that was on the approved
So
list.
Pops allowed you to watch Star Trek.
Yeah.
But
for those that don't know,
But other
there's
thing,
many.
there are so many shows. Like I'll mention, hey, do you remember the Love Boat? And he's like, Love Boat? What are you talking about? I've never seen the Love Boat. I'm like, who does not seen the Love Boat that's over the age of 45?
Sitcoms. We were not allowed to watch sitcoms.
It's crazy. What
Jeff
was the
Hutchin?
reason? Just once again,
Create a false sense of an
Family.
idea of what family should be.
and life is like.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a whole nother episode.
That's
for
a whole
nother day.
That's not today.
And
Back to Star Trek.
We can dive into that another time. But let's talk a little bit about today's episode. Who's bringing that to everyone today? It's our friends over at the Realty One Group Premier.
That's right.
And if this is huge because it's such a big decision, right, to purchase property,
No doubt.
to buy real estate, and you need somebody out there that you can trust, that can help put the numbers together, right? Because these are numbers that you're probably living with for the next 30 years.
True. And you also don't want to overpay from the standpoint of, how often do we hear the story of, I had to go $28,000 over asking price? And maybe that's kind of generally what's happening now out there in the real estate market. But I tell you what, you want to be in a position to be able to, if you do have to go over by the least amount, and to have somebody that's going to give you a good gauge as to what is happening with properties that are like yours. You need
Or
somebody
figure
like
out your
that.
options, right? Because Sherry and I just recently refinanced. We went to a 15-year note, which I'm fired up about.
Yep.
Maybe one day I'll see the end of my mortgage. That's my hope and
One
my
day.
prayer. But if you need someone to help you out on that, we've got the group for you. It's realty1grouppremier.com. That's where you can find them. And please reach out to them. Do your shopping with these groups, because there is a difference. Trust me. And this group can show you just exactly that. So, man, let's get into today's topic. And I don't even know how to introduce it. Because where we're headed today is you came in this morning off of vacation.
Yep.
And you said, dude, you're not going to believe. I think that's actually the word you used.
Yes.
Dude, you're not going to believe what our vacation was like. It was unlike anything. I don't want to overstate it, but it was unlike a lot of things you've ever experienced before. And that's what we want to unpack today and talk about why it was so unique and why it was so different. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Well, and to set further context before we go into that, I think this is one of those. We're going to start talking about what we've been calling untouchable topics.
That's right.
The stuff that maybe many people out there have been subconsciously asking, but never verbalizing, and certainly never hearing answers to. And not saying that we have all the answers, but we're going to tee up those questions and be unafraid of the conversation around it, and to ask God, what does he think about that?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, John, because a lot of times we tune into these type of podcasts to go, give me some answers to some things. And certainly we're going to try to provide some direction and pathway and point you in certain areas. But this is going to be an example today, I think, where we're not going to necessarily have a black and white.
That's right.
This is the answer. This is what you need to do.
Right.
But that's okay. Because I hope, my prayer is, just as it's done for you and I, it's driven us into a place of curiosity in our faith, right?
Fair.
And it forces us to ask questions that I think the Lord wants us to begin to ask. Because one of the things he talks about in his word is that he refers to it as the mystery of God. I have mysteries that I want to reveal to you. And I'll tell you this, the only way that you can begin to go after a mystery is you have to begin to ask the question.
That's right.
I as a little kid, I was the youngest of three. And I'll never forget a family trip that we took. We were moving cross country. And I was a little guy. Man, I must have been 6 or 7. I wasn't very old at all. And I remember nobody wanted me. So we had 2 cars. We had the moving truck that my dad drove, and we had the family wagon, right? It literally was a station wagon. And so I have an older brother and an older sister. And they would try to pawn me off of my dad at every stop. Like, hey, Jeff, why don't you ride with Dad this time? Then after the next stop, Dad would go, hey, why don't you ride with your mom? Because I was the type of kid that asked 1,000 questions, right? But you're never going to find the answer to the mystery unless you ask the question.
That's right.
And so we're going to post some questions today. And we're going to get into some topics. So without
By the way, real quick, was that the infamous pee in the coffee can in the desert
That was the
trip?
pee in the coffee can
I've seen
in the
pictures
desert.
of that
As a
one.
matter of fact, we're going to put a picture up right now. This is the trip.
Okay.
Right here. This is the trip. So the picture that's on the screen right now is our family vacation. We were Chevy Chase in vacation before it was cool.
The wood paneling on the station wagon.
I'm not even kidding. The only difference is there was 3 of us and not 2 kids.
That's right.
But we had the wood paneled country squire, the whole 9 yards. And anyway.
By the way, side note again, a movie reference that I did know. I've seen that movie.
Okay, that's good. That must have been when you were out
age.
of the house.
I was of age.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so my weekend, extended weekend, was unbelievable. Set it up. There's a group of friends and relatives, my wife's family. As you know, my wife is Native American, and her cousin is a very influential political leader, lobbyist, does a lot of work around Indian affairs and just representing the Native American community, both generally as well as his tribe in Washington, D.C. And as they've described it, so there's this group that has come together through mostly work relationships and common interest.
So they're not all Native Americans.
They're not
the people
all,
that are at this gathering.
Yeah, but the work that they do is certainly in that space. Most of them are.
Okay.
Spouses, some are not.
Okay.
But a group, and they have they've become this close-knit community, and they do fun stuff together, and they've been doing it for like 25 years, and we got to tag along this weekend.
Okay.
And without making any judgment at all on it's what we always want to know. Were they Christians? Are they in the Christian box or the non-Christian box, right? And I'll say that some I would absolutely say yes. Some I would say I don't know. And
some absolutely not. That's kind of what you're communicating.
I didn't even know that because it is, and we'll kind of get into that. But without belaboring the setup of the story. I came in just still on cloud 9. I mean, this was unreal. 12,000 square foot house that we rented on Camelback Mountain, Infinity Edge pool, orchestra, live orchestra for dinner. They flew in a chef. I mean, I've never been a part of anything like that. Okay, unbelievable. And what I came back with was, and this is the statement I made to you, I felt more rejuvenated and that there was more life in this assembly of people from just different faith journeys and different places in their faith. I was more encouraged in my faith and more enlivened by this assembly of people than I could ever imagine and ever have been in any sort of church small group setting. And my question to you was, why don't we have that?
Okay, so
I mean, you and I have it.
So let's
together.
back up. So why what was it specifically about the weekend that made you walk away with that, other than a bunch of luxuries that you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to partake in?
That aside, because that made it really cool and really fun. But what I'm speaking of, really, to your point, has nothing to do with that. I'll as I started to think about what was it, this is a community of people that live just unapologetically in authenticity, right? There is no covering of, well, is that person struggling with that? Yeah, they are, and everyone knows it, and they're coming alongside that person and encouraging them and helping them in their journey, right? And so there is no pretense. There's no hiding. There is no putting off of or the feeling the responsibility to put off this image of, well, if Christ is in me, then I'm supposed to be perfect. Okay. And I think to a certain degree, most of us have that in the church, and for good reason, right? We want to be good representatives of the one that we follow, right? But in that, I think we we take the pressure on ourselves of saying, well, then I've got to paint the best picture, the best image of myself. Okay. Is that fair? So I'd say the first one is authenticity. Yeah. I wrote down a few, but that's the first one.
Okay, so the authenticity around issues, around challenges, around struggles.
Yeah.
And you don't have to speak to this, because I know you want to protect people, but these were some pretty influential people.
Yes.
Just maybe short of famous. In some cases, maybe famous, depending on the circles you run in.
Correct.
So these are people of the world that have experienced things of the world, that are struggling with things of the world. Okay, we don't have to get into specifics.
Sure.
But what you're saying to me, though, is these are issues that were out on the table, and people weren't judging each other for that. They saw it. They weren't trying to cover it up. They weren't trying to hide it. It was who they were.
Yep.
And was there a genuine desire to try to reconcile those things, or was it just like, this is me, and let me be me?
I would say it's somewhere in between, because it wasn't. Even when you repeated back what I said, and I think you repeated it back really well, I thought, is that exactly true? I mean, it wasn't. There's this struggle that this person is having, and there's this sort of intervention, a little mini informal intervention around any of that. But really, it's more, I would say, just accepting people for their history, for who they are at this moment, and being able to look into them and appreciate. I feel like, again, back to the whole, Christian box, non-Christian box. We want the binary, light switch. It's either on or it's off. You're either a Christian or you're not. And have you prayed the sinner's prayer yet? That sort of a thing, right? And I got into some one particular conversation that as this person was speaking, everything that he was saying, there was these kernels and seeds of faith in him.
So let's go there.
Let's
go there, because you shared a little bit with me about this individual.
Yeah,
this is a very powerful individual in the film industry. We can say that in the film industry, and self-proclaimed atheist. And as you began to, here's the cool thing, John, and this is what I appreciate about you is and you've always been really good at this, is you go out of your way in some cases to plug yourself into areas and places that most Christians wouldn't feel comfortable, B, wonder even if they're supposed to be there, right? And I'm not talking about, we're not talking about radical places here.
Yeah.
But I'm saying this is a good example. You showed up to this place in Arizona, knowing that this wasn't a gathering of Christians to pray over the weekend.
Correct.
That there was going to be things of the world that would be represented there. And you're sitting down with this guy, having this conversation, and I think it's fascinating. Talk to us about the conversation that we had. And you said there's kernels, there's nuggets of truth that are residing, and he doesn't even realize.
That's right.
Talk about that.
Yeah, as a self-proclaimed atheist, he brought up the conversation around heaven and hell, which I thought was interesting. And
which, by the way, heaven and hell, that conversation amongst Christians, is controversial.
It is.
Let's just call it out.
No doubt.
But go ahead.
Yeah, and the conversation very quickly went to, from his perspective, and this is a man who I honestly feel like I wish I had a level of love for people that this man has. I instantly thought about, you remember when Jeff and Carrie Porter did their testimony, and they talked about the couple at the end of their wedding who had everybody raise money and donate to their charity, right? And he said that's what Christ is supposed to, those that follow Christ, that's what we're supposed to do. And as far as I know, I don't even know that that couple are followers of Christ, but demonstrated that. Why? So that sort of makes the kind of the point is, we've got a honing device inside of us, that there's love for God and people that are inside of us. And this, back to this guy, caring, deeply caring person, very interested in doing good in the world, not just at the policy level. I mean, he is in film, right? So this is not a political person, but not just from the standpoint of contributing to the art in a positive way, but individually, like if he was sitting here with you and the cameras were off, you'd have a 4-hour conversation, and you would walk away from it thinking and feeling just heard, understood, loved. And that's where this conversation went. So we're sitting there, and I'll say this, smoking cigars, overlooking.
Wait.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
you
indeed.
were smoking cigars without me?
Okay, yeah.
It really disappoints me.
There you go.
Me. Go ahead. I can get over that.
I love that. Yes, you're still my cigar smoking buddy. So let's just say that. Okay, you have not been replaced.
Cleared.
Okay. So we're having this conversation, and he's talking about, well, I mean, heaven is, if we're doing good things on this earth, heaven is the goodness that we take out of this earth.
So he believed in he believed in eternity.
Correct.
But he doesn't believe it in the concept of a heaven that God has created for those that follow him,
sure,
and a hell for those that have rejected him.
Sure.
He said there's an eternity out there, and you're either going to live in perpetual goodness or perpetual evil. Is that fair?
That's fair to say, yeah.
Okay.
And I said, it's interesting that from the standpoint of sort of being a self-proclaimed atheist, that you have this idea that my behavior begets an eternal
works-based.
Yeah.
Works-based salvation.
And I pointed out, I said, now, I think many Christians would agree with that, right? I disagree.
Right.
And here's what I told him. I said, you have this works-based, as you said, performance-based
salvation.
Paradigm about how salvation happens. And mine is very different. Mine is about identity. I am a son. Now, as a son, that should beget good works for sure. But the reason I'm going to heaven is because I'm a son of God, right? And so it's about identity, not performance. And that just, right? And so that
was a mind blow for him.
It was.
Because he was probably fully expecting you to say,
100%.
Yeah, we're in agreement from the standpoint of works is what's going to drive you. Because, right, we've talked about this on here, I think, before, that oftentimes you meet somebody and you go, hey, do you think you're going to heaven?
Yeah.
What's the common answer? Well, yeah, I think I've done more good things than bad things.
That's right.
Right? So the mindset out there that a lot of Christians have, or a lot of professed Christians have, is that as long as I am good more than I'm bad, it's a scale. And as long as it outweighs the bad, then I'm good. I'm probably going to heaven and I'm going to get in. But Jesus, right, is very much, he speaks specifically to that. And he says, no, it has nothing to do with your works. It has everything to do with faith. And to your point, as we walk in faith as a son, in our identity, the natural outflow or supernatural outflow of that is going to be the good works that you're speaking of.
No doubt.
Okay. So how did he receive that?
So, he again, just this amazing conversation back and forth. My brain is open. My heart is open to learn from him. I'll be honest with you. And his was open, and his brain was open to learn from me. And again, I'll go back to this specific story, but I think that was another characteristic of why it was so life-giving. We didn't go in with dogma.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, on the other side of that, you don't kind of go in, and you've heard the expression, the man who stands for nothing falls for anything, right? You should know where you stand on some things. But it's not dogmatic. It's sort of the opening of our hearts and minds and sharing of ideas and appreciating the seeds and kernels of faith and goodness that are in other people, regardless of whether they're in the Christian box or not, right? And so back to then the rest of that conversation, and I mean, there was a couple of hours of it, but I would say one of the more significant things that happened was, as he's talking about how we are to love people, I said to him, I said, I don't mean to ruffle your feathers here, but you kind of sound a little bit like Jesus. He said, what do you mean? And I said, and I didn't quote, but I summarized what Jesus said about, all of the law and the prophets hang on these two things, right? The great command, love God and love people. And all the rest are just details. All of those other laws, you do the first and the second, and you live your life like that, you will fulfill those laws. And he said, and he was like, really? And I said, yeah. And I said, so, I mean, you kind of sound like you might actually be a Christian. I'm just saying. And he goes, great, fine, I'm a Christian.
It's what's fascinating about what you said, because as I'm just thinking through and processing, literally we've had about 20 minutes to process this episode.
Yeah.
Prior to jumping on and starting the filming.
Yeah.
And that's typically how we do things. We just kind of go, what's God doing in our heart, man? Let's get on camera. Let's talk about it. That's literally what this is about. God gave us the word unscripted, right?
Yep.
So we haven't had much time to really prep on this. And so I've been asking Holy Spirit, what is it you're doing here? What is it you're stirring? Because your question at the end of the day is, why is it that I experienced a level of authenticity, love, transparency with these people over these days in that moment when I've had a hard time? I don't want to put words in your mouth. You're saying I've had a hard time experiencing that same thing amongst the church.
I would say that that's true.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so I think I might have something for us to chew on.
That's true.
And that is this. And you said it. And in that gentleman's comments, he even expressed it. Think about the law that was given through Moses. Okay? What was the purpose of it? Why did God give his children the law?
Yeah, the Bible says that the law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ.
Okay. So it certainly was a prophetic sign moving his children towards Jesus, towards the Messiah.
Yeah.
But let's back up before that. When God established the law for his children, and I'm thinking about Leviticus. I'm in Leviticus right now. And Moses is still speaking to the children of Israel. They still have not crossed over the Jordan. They still haven't moved into the Promised Land. And there's a couple chapters, probably 10, 15 chapters, where what Moses basically does is summarizes everything that took place since the release from the Egyptians. He summarizes it all, goes back over it in painful detail. Everything from the festivals to the celebrations to the sacrifices and the different sacrifices and the laws and the Ten Commandments. And he's going over all these things. Yep. And he's reestablishing all this. Why was he doing that? Why did he take the painstaking time to do that? And why was so much Scripture committed to that, do you think, prior to entering in?
I mean, ultimately, I don't exactly know, in that moment what he was doing, and I want to hear your perspective on it. I do think that the law was given to establish righteousness.
Okay.
And in some ways, and in the eternal wisdom and knowledge of God, knowing that no one was going to be able to fulfill it except Jesus. But it set the standard so that we understand the life that Jesus led, the perfection, and the fact that our lives, we can, as Abraham was counted as righteous by his belief.
That's right.
So you and I can as well, right?
Absolutely. And that's exactly where I'm going with this.
All right.
So what Moses was doing is he was recapturing what God was giving him to the children of Israel to say, listen, these are the standards that allow you to enjoy the promises of the land for which I'm about to give you. And I'm not talking just about the geographical land. Of course, this part geographical is the covenant.
Sure.
But he's also talking about the other promises, the many more promises beyond just the geographical promise.
Yes.
It's his blessing, it's his favor, it's his protection, it's his wisdom, it's his understanding. It's all these things that he's saying, listen, if you abide in me, in my law, then this is what comes with it. God knew that there's no way that the children could upkeep the law.
Right.
It's impossible.
Right.
Why? Why did God do that? You said it. Pointing towards the need of a Messiah. Pointing towards the ultimate sacrifice, right? Yeah. So Jesus comes, right? And he says, now let me sum these things up for you. Let me ask you a question. It's one word. How do we fulfill the law today?
By faith.
You know what he says?
What's that?
You're going to love this, my brother.
Okay, let's go.
You're going to love this. Romans chapter 13.
Okay.
I want you to look. Let's start in verse 8.
Okay.
13:8. And this is cool because my pastor showed this to me this weekend. And it was like a piece of the puzzle fell into place for me based on what God's taken me through. And it says this, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to do what?
Love one another.
Love one another. He said, listen, is there a debt that we have to one another? What's the greatest debt you have to give to your fellow man? Love.
Wow.
Love. Right?
Yeah.
Listen, for he loves his fellow man, for he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law.
Wow.
The commandments do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and what other commandment there may be are summed up in this rule. You just said it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to its neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law.
That's good.
So
that's really good.
What's fascinating about this is I think to answer, this is part of my answer to your question. Why is it amongst the church? Why is it amongst the Christian community that we struggle to love the way that this secular group of people that came together are showing and exemplifying before you? And here's what I think it is. John, I think we get so hung up in this religious spirit that I have to perform, and I have to do certain things, and I have to be at a standard of righteousness, and I have to portray this certain image. And by the way, heaven forbid that I actually expose that to other people, my weakness.
Right.
That I live a life full of authenticity, that I live a life full of transparency. Because after all, if you see that in me, what's that a reflection on? My works. And my works, therefore, aren't good enough. And if that's the most important thing to me, if that's my standard, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to protect them.
Yeah.
But he says, it's not that at all. It's what he just said. You want to fulfill my law? Do it the way I did it. And love. Love your neighbor. Even if they're your enemy. Love your neighbor. And we struggle with that as a church because I think the enemy uses that religious spirit of fulfilling the law against us. And Jesus says, you got it all wrong, people. You got it all wrong. It's about loving.
Yep.
And it's about loving each other. You know, I got this bracelet on that my daughter gave me a couple years ago, and it's the answer to the WWJD. What would Jesus do?
Yep.
It says HWLF. He would love first.
No doubt.
And it literally just came together for me on air here as we're talking about this, because I didn't know what the answer was going to be when I was like, why is it you see this exemplified in this community and you're not seeing it within the church?
Yeah.
The difference is the church is bathed in the spirit of religion, and I don't mean that in a good way.
Unfortunately, you're right, man.
What are your thoughts? React to that.
No.
We got about a minute left.
Yeah. Besides just sort of dumbly amening, because I don't know if I could add anything to that, just to echo back, that is a better summary of what I came in with. I just left 5 days of open hearts and a community of love than you can ever imagine. I'll share this. Again, these are unnamed people, okay? There was a very powerful moment in which it was revealed that sort of, joking and telling stories and, hey, remember that time that, and this person was given communion, and as part of I think it was part of a wedding that he was in, and he took the elements and put them in his pocket and didn't take it. And yet, during this conversation, the words that he was speaking and the things that he was receiving back from people, in his eyes, I could see this is his communion. Love that he's got for each one of the people here at this table and just people in general. And to give it and to receive it in a genuine way. It's not that, you know what I think about you? I admire this. Oh, no, man. No, I'm not. That's all image crap. Just receive it. Receive the fact that people admire you for X, Y, or Z, and receive that. And so I said to him, I said, that is your communion. And then I was reminded, because even in Scripture it says, don't you take communion unworthily, because there's a curse associated with that.
That's me to
yeah. And I was like, you know what? Put it in your pocket. And there's times that I should too.
Yeah.
And to let the honing device of love take me back to God.
Well, here's the last statement I'll say, and
Yeah.
we got to dive a lot more into this.
Yeah, we're gonna do it.
Is that as in Isaiah 49:8 it says this, that God says to you and I, He says, I'm going to give you as a covenant to my people.
Wow.
Just sit on that for a second. I'm going to give you, John Saboro,
Yep.
I'm going to give you as a covenant. You are going to be the representative of my promise.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the covenant is, my promise. He says, I'm gonna give you to be a covenant to my people. So I'm going to leave you with this. When God sent you into that 12,000 square foot home with the private chef and the private quartet or whatever came in, they flew in, and all the wonderful food and all the things you got to experience.
Yeah.
The perspective of a son walking in sonship is this. Even though I'm potentially walking into a place that might be dark, there might be some temptation, there might be things of the world, he says, don't be afraid of those things, because I'm going to go before you. My covenant will go before you. My promises will go before you. And I will use you, if you allow me, I will use you to be a representative of my love, my mercy, my grace, my forgiveness, my self-control, my righteousness to these people that maybe don't know me yet. Because here's the thing, to your point. The one thing every single person in that house had in common, whether they realize it or not, is their creator.
No doubt about it.
And each person has that hole in here that is searching for something, right? And when you have an opportunity to step into that place and represent truth and represent his love, don't think for a second, I know you don't, but don't think for a second it doesn't make a difference.
I appreciate that, and I would even say in closing that from my perspective, it's really humbling to hear you say it like that, because I didn't see it like that. I just saw myself being part of this group and loving people and recognizing this. I've got my own holes.
Yep.
And if we can, oftentimes we look back on memories, pictures, places that we've been that remind us where we were in our life at a given point, and you sort of look back and roll your eyes like I was such an idiot. And you know me, I've got many of those phases of life. And what we discount is 20 years from now, I may look back at this moment and say, God, I was such an idiot. And not that we throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying recognize that we've got our own holes. We've got our own junk, as our friend Sonia Bruno would say. We got our own crud. And maybe, just maybe, somebody that you may think is not, doesn't go to church every Sunday, whatever, has got the kernel and seed of faith and goodness in them, is exactly what you need to hear and receive. And in that reciprocation, you both get closer to God.
That's right. Good stuff. Yeah. Hey, thanks for sharing that. Great story. Sure. We're going to keep unpacking this stuff. A lot more to talk about. We just talked about 3 or 4 things that we need to go a lot deeper in. But I hope this encouraged you. I hope it got you thinking. And I hope it presses you into the Word of God to begin to understand these truths that are mysteries. That here's the cool thing. He wants to reveal those to his children. He wants to reveal those to you and I. Hey, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Pursuit.